In this video, we will learn about functions. Functions are basically just some lines of code that, when called, perform a specific task. They allow us to reuse code in a dynamic way, so in different places and with different values. Now you might say, can't I just use loops if I want to reuse my code? And you're right, that works, but there are some limitations. Let's look at an example. So let's say we want to print hi. And we don't want to do that once, we want to do that 3 times. And now we don't just want to copy and paste these lines, but instead we can use a for loop. So that if we want to make changes to our print statement, such as adding an exclamation mark to our hi, we don't have to edit all 3 lines. And so we write a for loop. Now to the limitation that comes with loops. Let's say after saying hi 3 times, we want to print catching breath. And then after that, we again print hi 3 times. While this works, of course, we are repeating our code. And it's not just the repetition that's a problem, but also the fact that if we now want to make changes, for example, change the uppercase I to a lowercase I, we have to do that in both places. And so if we have to do something more than once, and also want the option to do it differently, then we make use of functions. And so in Python, to define a function, we use the define keyword. After that, we write the name of the function. And then we put opening and closing brackets. This will later give us space for passing arguments. After the brackets, we put a colon, and then in the next line with an indentation, we put the code that should be executed when the function is called. We're not allowed to leave this completely empty, but we can write pass, which indicates that when the function is called, nothing will happen. And so to now call our function, we write its name, and then again opening and closing brackets, which again leaves room for arguments. If we don't write these brackets, then we will refer to the function itself. So we can print, say hi, and that gives us the name of our function object and also its memory address. When we now add brackets to our function, so we call it, then for now it will not return anything, or rather none. To now add some functionality to our function, we can add the print statement in the function body. So we write print and then hi. And if we now run our code, calling the function will bring us to the function definition, and there we print the hi. And we're still returning none. So if we want this none to be gone, then we just remove the outer print statement, and thus we ignore the function's return value. Another option we have is to leave the print statement, and instead of printing inside of the function, we return a hi. This will give us then the same output. And when we call our function, we can think that whatever is returned replaces this function call. So we can think of these 2 lines as equivalent. And this allows us to, for example, chain functions. So we could add a dot lower after a function call, since this is basically just a string. And so now we can make the comparison to the for loops. So if we add a for loop in here, and then first call the function once, that gives us our 3 highs again. Then we can manually print catching breath. And then we call the say hi function again. And now if we want to make small changes, we can just do it once in the function. Now let's have a look at the brackets, which is the space where we can put arguments. And so arguments can be just about anything. For example, we could have a string in here where we specify who we say hi to, maybe you. So if we specify this argument in the function call, then we also have to specify a variable that we can assign the value to in the function definition. Let's call it variable person. In this variable, we can then use throughout our function. But note that this variable is not defined outside of this function. So it's just available in the scope of this function. Here we can see name person is not defined. Okay, so let's say hi to our person. And we do that by concatenating the person to the hi. And this gives us an error. It says say hi missing 1 required positional argument. And it's pointing to line 9. And we get this error because we specified a variable here, which means the function is expecting a person, but our second function call is not given any person. So let's add me here. And now our code will run. Another way of getting rid of this error would have been to specify a default argument. And this is done in the function definition. So you could set the default argument to x. And then whenever there's no fitting argument given in the function call, it will refer to this default value. Okay, one last time, let's have a look at our error. And we can see that the argument that is required is called a positional argument. And so to explain positional arguments, we'll add one more parameter to our function definition, called times. And this will affect how often we want to print the high. On a side note, if you're confused by arguments and parameters, we can treat them as the same thing, but usually we say we call a function with arguments, and once the arguments have arrived, we call them the parameters of a function. So these are the function's parameters, and they are assigned the arguments that we call the function with. Okay, now back to positional arguments. Since we now have two arguments, the order in which we pass the arguments matters. So for example, we cannot pass 2 and then the string u, because that way u will go to times and range does not work for strings. And so if we pass our arguments in a way where the position matters, we call the arguments positional arguments. So these are positional arguments and we have to change the order in order to make the function work. The alternative to positional arguments are keyword arguments, and they allow us to change up the order. And so to write a keyword argument, we write the parameter's name, so person, then equal, and then our value that we want to pass, and then same for times. And this will work no matter the order. So we can put the times also in front, and it will still work. What's important is that we always put the positional arguments, so those without a keyword, in front of our function call. So we cannot first have a keyword argument and then a positional argument. And that makes sense because putting a lot of keyword arguments in front messes up the positions, so they will no longer match. And so if we then put it in front, then it will work again. And so now as a final demonstration, we can first say hi to you, then we say hi to someone else. We do that 3 times, here 4 times. And we see it's a really convenient way of reusing code with the option of also using different values.